Greetings, fellow primates. Just Pattis here. Welcome to the zoo. I spent years working in zoos, and let me tell you, I've seen some things. In each episode of this series, I'll be adding something new to my Minecraft zoo while sharing stories from my time working with animals. Some of these stories are wholesome, some are hilarious, and some will make you question who the real wild animals are, the residents of the zoo or the visitors. For today's story, we're starting off strong with the guest who earned the nickname the Park Pooper. Working with the public was always eventful, to say the least. Things people will do when they think no one is watching are honestly kind of bananas. But to be fair, I was once one of those visitors. When I was in 10th grade, my school took 60 students on a field trip to the zoo and kind of just set us loose with no adult supervision. Looking back on that after working at a zoo myself, 60 unsupervised 15 and 16-year-olds wandering freely around the park is one of a zookeeper's worst nightmares. During the trip, my friend and I found an empty exhibit that was under construction. After a quick glance around to make sure nobody was watching, we hopped over the glass barrier to take a couple of pictures. As a zookeeper, I can now say that this was incredibly stupid. However, compared to some of the things I've watched visitors do, it was pretty tame. We at least kept our chaos controlled. We didn't damage anything, bother an animal, or create any extra work for the staff. There's just something about animal facilities that makes people act, well, like animals. I've seen everything, from a small child halfway up the 10-foot fence surrounding a tiger enclosure to a grown adult using their hands to scoop water out of an algae covered fountain and drinking it. And this wasn't like some sort of fancy drinking fountain that hadn't been cleaned in a while. This was a stone garden fountain that had very obviously been treated with bleach. But nothing could have prepared me for the sheer amount of public urination that happens at zoos. With very young children, it's a little more understandable. Toddlers don't always recognize when they need to get to a bathroom. Everybody's super excited to be at the zoo, and realistically, the blame can usually be placed more on the parents than the child. The older kids, though, were a little more surprising. One of my coworkers was once leading a small guided tour around the park, and at some point during the tour, he looked over and saw a 7-year-old child standing there, just casually peeing directly onto his mother's shoes. And the strangest part was that his mom was completely unfazed. She just kind of gave my coworker a quiet little apology and then continued the tour like nothing had even happened. It seemed like this was not a new experience for her. I honestly have no idea how my coworker kept his composure to finish the tour after that, but needless to say, as soon as he was done, he made a beeline to the staff area to share what had happened. Now, I don't have children, but I have potty trained a 4-month-old monkey, so I can't imagine it's unreasonable to expect a 7-year-old human to know not to pee on his mother's shoes in the middle of a public tour. The really surprising part, though, was the number of completely sober, mentally sound adults who would relieve themselves anytime they found a semi secluded area. It didn't matter if there was an empty restroom literally right there. Some people would still rather just duck behind a tree right beside the walkway. For most of these people, it was very clearly a choice, not an emergency. But I do also understand that accidents can happen. And that brings us to the infamous park pooper. It was a couple hours after opening, and I was inside the gift shop doing some paperwork when one of my coworkers walked in looking deeply confused. He told me he had found some strange fecal matter around our cockatoo enclosure, but he couldn't figure out where it had come from. Could it have somehow come from the cockatoos? Was there a raccoon with an upset stomach roaming the park? Maybe an opossum had scavenged a particularly questionable meal. This coworker was a Boy Scout through and through, and even he couldn't identify the scab. Since I had a lot of experience with native wildlife, he came to me for a second opinion. So I put on my detective hat and we headed out to investigate. When I arrived at the scene, I was fully unprepared for what I saw. There was an absolutely heinous spattering of diarrhea covering the ground and reaching several inches up the side of the enclosure. There was no way the cockatoos could have possibly achieved the correct trajectory from inside their habitat to make that happen. There were also no tracks, paw prints, or any other signs that a wild animal had been in the area. I was just as confused as my coworker. But our investigation wasn't over yet. There was a security camera pointed directly toward the cockatoo enclosure. It was still early in the morning, so I knew there wouldn't be much footage to review. If we rewound through the previous night and that morning, we would probably find an answer fairly quickly. I went back inside and began sifting through the footage while my coworker finished his morning rounds. I sat in my rolling computer chair, neck craned up towards the security monitor, and started rewinding from the moment he discovered the scene of the crime. I watched the usual morning activity in reverse: visitors walking toward the aviary, people stopping to dance with the cockatoos, and a whole lot of absolutely nothing. We hadn't had many guests yet, so there weren't very many suspects. Meanwhile, my coworker had finished his rounds and widened the search area around the enclosure. He ended up finding a trash bag and several napkins stashed behind some nearby bushes. He came inside to tell me about this new evidence, not even 2 minutes before I finally reached the moment we had been looking for. And there she was, an elderly woman standing in full view of the security camera in the middle of the pathway, pulled down her pants and squatted directly in front of the cockatoos. Unfortunately, the camera saw everything. A younger woman, who we assume was either her daughter or a caretaker, appeared shortly afterward, already carrying a trash bag and napkins. She helped the woman clean up, tossed the bag and used napkins into the bushes, and then the two of them made a very swift exit. My coworker and I were completely stunned. And honestly, the footage gave us more questions than answers. Did they know there was a restroom less than 20 feet away? Why did the younger woman appear after the incident already carrying the cleanup supplies? Did she somehow know this was about to happen? Why was her first move to grab a trash bag instead of taking the woman to the bathroom? Did either of them consider telling a staff member that they had created a biohazard in the middle of a public walkway? And based on how quickly and efficiently the cleanup was executed, had this happened before? We'll never know. What I do know is that a large amount of disinfectant was used that morning. And by the end of the day, the legend of the park pooper had spread throughout the entire staff. So the next time you visit a zoo, remember, the animals are probably not the strangest creatures in the park. As for our Minecraft zoo, I think today's build is officially complete. Although, after this story, I may need to think about adding some bathrooms. Be sure to join the troop so you don't miss the next zoo story, because believe me, the park pooper was only the beginning. Until next time, stay wild.